I wish I could tell you I felt proud after I hit send. That leaking Callista's proposal plan was some kind of triumphant feminist reclaiming of power. But the truth? My stomach twisted like I'd swallowed a whole fist of ice. My hands trembled for hours, and I couldn't bring myself to look at my phone. Jonah found me curled up on the couch the next morning, still in yesterday's clothes, the faint glow of my laptop illuminating my blank stare. "Did something happen?" he asked, brushing the hair back from my forehead. I nodded slowly, guilt sitting heavy in my throat. I sent out her proposal plan. He blinked. "You? What?" I told him everything. The photos, the lies, her using my wedding to build her brand, the Paris stunt, all of it. He didn't say anything at first. He just sat beside me, hand resting on my knee. Finally, he said, "That was a line, Elira." "I know." "But you didn't draw it first. She did." That helped. A little. Enough to let me sleep that night. The fallout began 2 days later. I got a message from Nadia, one of Callista's oldest friends. It was a screenshot of a group chat. Someone had forwarded the PDF with a laughing emoji, and the caption, "This chick choreographs everything, even her proposal." Another voice chimed in. "Guess she's more director than bride. Lock." Nadia just texted, "What happened between you two? She's spiraling." I didn't answer. Callista didn't call me. Not then. But she posted a black square on her Instagram, followed by a story slide with the text, "Some people will do anything to destroy your joy. I see you. I forgive you." Forgive me. Like she was the victim. I ignored it, tried to move on, focused on work, on Jonah. On the tiny downtown loft we were trying to renovate into something resembling a home. But she never let up, not really. She unfollowed me, blocked me. Then she started posting subtle digs. Things like authenticity always wins, and asterisk. Real queens don't have to scheme. Her friends joined in too. Whispered slights, snide comments at family dinners. My uncle asked, "You and Callista have a falling out? She says you're in a dark place." I clenched my teeth so hard it made my jaw ache. Jonah and I threw ourselves into work. I was a junior architect at a boutique firm in Bristol, and we were finally getting a shot at the city's urban renewal project. It meant late nights, long weekends, but I loved every second of it. Jonah ran digital strategy for a green tech startup, so our lives overlapped just enough to feel close, but separate enough that we didn't suffocate each other. Except every now and then, I'd check Callista's feed. And she was thriving. She landed a spread in a major lifestyle magazine. One of the photos, Jaime Photos, was featured in a section titled "The New Romantic Aesthetic." She didn't name me. Of course she didn't. The final straw came in December. Jonah and I had hosted a holiday dinner for both sides of the family. Callista showed up an hour late, wearing a velvet dress and dragging Marcus behind her like an accessory. She brought a bottle of champagne, which she handed to me with a smile so sugary I thought my teeth might rot. "Oh, and sorry about the wedding pics," she said loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Next time, hire a pro, not family." There were polite chuckles. A few people glanced away. I smiled through it. I always did. But something in me cracked. Later that night, Jonah found me scrubbing the kitchen tile grout like it had personally insulted me. "Hey," he said gently. "What if you didn't let her keep doing this?" "Doing what?" "Owning your story." I stopped, dropped the sponge, sat on the cold floor and looked up at him. "You think I should fight back? Again?" "No," he said. "I think you should finish what she started, but on your terms." It took me weeks to figure out what that meant, and when I finally did, it scared me. Because it meant confronting everything. Even the part of me that still loved her. I started with the old photos, not from the wedding, those were lost, but I had hundreds of others, years of snaps and candids she'd emailed me over the years, stored in cloud drives, some on my old laptop, some on my phone. Pictures she'd taken, edited, claimed. I began curating them, not just as memories, but as evidence. Then I wrote. It started as a journal entry, turned into an essay, Then an open letter. I titled it, "My Sister Took My Wedding Photos." Here's what she gave me instead. I didn't name her. Not directly, but I told the truth. Every detail. From the missing files to the fashion shoot she built off my day. I included screenshots, timelines, emails, even the editorial credits where she listed herself as the sole creative. I posted it to Medium. Quietly, no announcement. And then it went viral. Within 3 days, it had over 400,000 views. Comments flooded in. People shared their own stories, siblings who'd betrayed them, family members who'd used them. Some were angry on my behalf. Others called it petty drama. But one thing was clear, the tide had turned. I didn't check Callista's socials, but Nadia texted me again. She's losing it. Sponsors pulling out. One of her clients demanded a refund. She thinks you leaked it. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because 2 days later, Callista showed up at my office. Not at the reception desk, not in the lobby. She walked right into our studio, in the middle of a design review, wearing sunglasses and fury. "Elira, now." My boss raised an eyebrow. I stood, excused myself, followed her into the hallway. She tore off the glasses, her eyes were bloodshot. "You ruined me. You erased me. I created Chachu. You'd still be some small-town nobody without me. And now I'm somebody, without you." Her face contorted. I thought she might slap me. Instead, she said, "You want war? Fine, let's go to war." She turned and walked out. And I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe! Now, back to the story. Within 24 hours, Callista's PR firm issued a statement on her behalf. It was a masterclass in deflection. "We regret that a recent personal dispute has been made public. Callista remains committed to her vision and will continue her work empowering women through art." Empowering women, the irony nearly made me laugh. But I didn't have time to stew in it. My piece had drawn attention from an editor at a major digital magazine. She wanted to commission a follow-up. I wrote it. Fast. When Sisterhood Turned Sour, a story of creative theft and control. It published with my full name. And this time, people noticed me. Not just my pain. Me. An old professor emailed. A talent scout. A podcast invited me to speak. And slowly, the balance shifted. People were talking about my time's work. My words. My story. That's when Jonah found the email. He was going through our shared inbox. "You've got something here from Westbridge Arts Foundation. They want to talk about an artist residency." My jaw dropped. Westbridge was prestigious. The kind of place Callista used to dream of. I accepted the interview. And I didn't tell her. But she found out anyway. Because 2 days before my Westbridge portfolio review, I got a cease and desist letter. From her lawyer. Alleging defamation, creative theft, emotional damages. My hands shook as I read it. Jonah stood behind me. "She's trying to scare you, that's all. What if it works?" He looked me dead in the eye. "Only if you let it." I emailed the foundation, sent them the letter, attached my response, included my entire folder of documentation. They emailed back 3 hours later. "We've reviewed the matter and remain enthusiastic about your submission. See you Tuesday." And just like that, I exhaled. But war has casualties, and she wasn't done firing shots. Not yet. War has casualties, and she wasn't done firing shots. I woke the next morning to another ding, a Slack notification from HR. Callista had filed a formal grievance against me. Harassment, hostile work environment, defamation. They wanted proof of my statements. I forwarded everything. The Medium posts, the open letter, the email thread from her PR firm, even the PDF of her proposal plan. My phone buzzed with emojis of fists and hearts and raised glasses from colleagues who saw it unfolding. Chest tight, I climbed into my car and drove to the studio. The streets of Bristol blurred past in the silver morning light. I felt detached, like I was watching someone else's life on mute. But I knew better. This was my life, and I wouldn't let her bulldoze me again. At the office, the HR rep, Marisol, met me in the glass-walled conference room. She had the kind of calm presence that made me think of meditation retreats. Elira, we've reviewed Callista's grievance. I need you to walk me through each incident. I took a deep breath and gave her the timeline. My wedding photos, the leak, her Instagram strikes, the cease and desist, the Westbridge portfolio. Every detail, every date, every screenshot I could muster. Marisol listened, nodding, typing furiously. Very thorough, she said, looking up with green eyes that held both sympathy and professional caution. We'll present this to the board. In the meantime, we need you to avoid contact with Callista, direct or indirect. No more social posts about her, no mention in meetings. Understood? I nodded. Understood. That afternoon, while sketching concepts for the urban renewal project, my mind kept drifting back to Callista's words. You'd still be some small-town nobody without me. Small-town nobody. I pressed my pen to the page, scribbling over the rejection letters I'd hidden in my drawer. No more. I drafted an email to the Westbridge Arts Foundation. A thank you note for their support, a reaffirmation of my vision. I clicked send before second-guessing. Then I texted Jonah, meeting at Mercado at 7, need your moral support. He replied, I'll be there. The restaurant was half empty, the wooden tables polished to a shine. Jonah slid into the booth across from me, pulling off his jacket. Good news? He asked. His eyes were bright with hope. Better than that? I leaned forward. I've been invited to give a talk at the Bristol Women in Design Conference next month. His grin could have lit up the cathedral. That's amazing! It is, I said, but there's a catch. Callista is one of the keynote speakers. He blinked. Wait, she? After everything? She's presenting on personal branding for creatives. Ironic, right? He rubbed his temples. Are you going to go? I paused. My gut said no, but another part of me knew this was exactly the spotlight I needed. Yes, I said finally. I'll be there, and I'll speak my truth. That night, I drafted my speech. I didn't sugarcoat it. I began with gratitude. To the organizers, to the women who'd supported me. And then I wove my story in. A narrative of creative theft, of betrayal, and of reclamation. I practiced in front of the mirror until my voice didn't waver. Weeks passed. The city square outside the conference hall buzzed with activity. Street musicians, coffee carts, poster stands. Banners fluttered. Bristol Women in Design 2025. I clutched my notes, heart pounding, as I walked backstage. Callista was there. Tall, poised, her hair blunt and glossy. She nodded curtly. No hello, no acknowledgement. I stared at her, for a heartbeat, then turned away. My cue arrived. The moderator introduced me with a warm smile. I stepped onto the stage, under bright lights. A hush fell over the audience of 200 designers, architects, photographers. I scanned their faces, young and old, hopeful and hungry for change. I began. Thank you for having me. My name is Elira Ashton, and until recently, my story was defined by someone else. I heard a rustle near the back, an audible gasp, but I pressed on, reciting the tale of my wedding day, the lost photos, the editorial takeover, the viral essays, the legal threats. I paused, eyes shining with quiet fury. This isn't just a personal vendetta, I said, voice steady. It's a cautionary tale. In our world, creativity is our currency. When someone steals your work, they steal your identity, they rewrite your history. My words echoed in the hall. Then I offered hope. The power of documentation, of community, of speaking up. I ended with a call to arms. Protect your story. Honor your truths. And when someone tries to erase you, show them what happens when you press send. Applause thundered. Phones rose. Cameras clicked. I stepped off stage to a clutch of designers offering hugs. 3 days later, the conference video had thousands of views online, with comments praising my bravery. But Callista? I never saw her. That night, I returned to our loft. The old brick walls were warm with candlelight. Jonah greeted me at the door with a hug. You were incredible. I let myself feel it. The pride, the relief, the exhaustion. It's not over. He kissed my temple. No, but you've won the first battle. The next morning, my inbox exploded. Westbridge Arts Foundation. Congratulations. We'd like to offer you a 3-month residency. My architectural firm. We'd like to feature your work in our annual review with a full interview. 2 podcasts. Invitations. I let it wash over me. This was the moment I'd fought for. Recognition on my own terms. I drafted responses, smiling as I typed. Then I opened my email from Callista's lawyer. Another threat, another demand for removal of all online content. I deleted it. I opened a new draft. Subject: Opportunity for reconciliation? I wrote, Callista, I never wanted to lose my sister, but I needed to claim my voice. When you're ready to talk, I'll be here. Elira. And hit send. I didn't know if she'd answer, but for the first time in years, I felt the weight lift. My story was mine again. I looked out the window at the setting sun over Bristol's skyline. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles. But I was ready. There's a particular kind of silence that follows a legal threat. A silence that feels like the world is holding its breath, waiting to see who blinks first. That's what the next week felt like. An extended, sharp inhale. I didn't blink. The morning of the Westbridge Review, I stood in front of the mirror for 20 full minutes. Not because I was vain or nervous about my outfit. I'd chosen a structured navy jumpsuit and low heels, but because I needed to see myself, ground myself. I needed to remember that I belonged in that room. Jonah made me tea, kissed my temple, walked me to the elevator of our building like I was going off to battle. The Westbridge offices sat on a quiet street flanked by old oaks and art galleries. I stepped inside the renovated Georgian townhouse and tried not to let my nerves rattle the metal clasp of my portfolio. The interview panel was composed of 4 people. An older woman with horn-rimmed glasses who reminded me of every art history professor I'd ever loved, a younger man in a corduroy jacket and matching optimism, a woman I recognized from a TED Talk on design equity, and a quiet, sharp-eyed administrator who didn't smile once. They asked thoughtful questions. What inspires your material choices in urban environments? How do you balance emotional narrative with structural integrity in your work? Tell us about a time someone took credit for your creative vision and what you did. That last one made me pause. But I didn't flinch. I answered truthfully but professionally. No names, just impact. When I finished, the quiet woman nodded once. We'll be in touch. I left the building feeling like my skin was 2 sizes too big. I was drained and wired all at once. And when I turned my phone back on, it buzzed with a text from Nadia. You didn't hear this from me. But Callista's pulled from the wellness retreat panel next month. Word is a major sponsor threatened to drop if she stayed. I sat on the nearest bench and read it 3 times. Then I allowed myself a breath. Just one. Because a win like that, it was like finding shelter in a storm. Not the end, but a brief, precious reprieve. 3 days later, I got the call. Westbridge was offering me the residency. I stared at my phone in stunned silence until Jonah came bursting into the room, grinning like a madman. You got it, didn't you? I nodded slowly, then collapsed onto the couch, laughing and crying at once. The residency started in 6 weeks. I was assigned a shared workspace with 2 other artists, a sculptor from Spain and a poet from Dublin. Our project brief? Asterisk, reclamation, memory, space, and the female voice. Fitting. I threw myself into it. Days blurred into evenings. I sketched, modeled, designed, rewrote. I forgot to answer texts. I barely checked socials. For the first time in months, maybe years, my life wasn't about Callista. It was about creation. About me. Which is why the voicemail from my father hit like a sucker punch. Elira, your sister is in the hospital. Call me. No details. Just that. I called back instantly. He answered on the first ring. She collapsed at the launch party last night. Something with her blood sugar, or maybe stress. They ran tests. It might be her heart. My knees went weak. I sat down hard on the studio floor. I hadn't spoken to him in months. Not since he'd taken her side, back when she was publicly claiming I'd ruined her. Where is she? St. Augustine's. I was on the next train. Jonah offered to come. I told him no, I needed to do this alone. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and old plastic chairs. The nurse at the front desk asked if I was family. I hesitated. Then I nodded. Room 417. Callista was asleep when I entered. Her face looked younger without makeup, paler, fragile. For the first time in forever, I saw not the woman who'd hijacked my wedding, but the girl who used to make me cocoa when I had nightmares. I sat in the visitor chair, waited. She stirred half an hour later. You came, she said groggily. Of course I did. Her lip quivered. I didn't think you would. Silence stretched. Finally, she whispered, They think it was stress-induced arrhythmia. I've been pushing too hard. Burning both ends. I nodded, said nothing. Her voice cracked. You hate me, don't you? That question sat between us like a broken mirror. No, I said at last. I just stopped letting you erase me. She turned her face to the window. I thought if I kept moving, creating, curating, I'd matter more. I didn't mean to steal from you. Not really, I didn't know how to stop performing. I swallowed. You could have just said you were scared. Her eyes met mine. Would you have listened? I blinked. I don't know. Maybe. She looked so small then. Just a girl in a hospital gown, not a brand, not a rival, just my sister. What happens now? She asked. I stood, picked up my bag. That's up to you. At the door, I paused. If you want a sister, Callista, not a prop or a rival, I'm here, but I'm not playing the part you wrote for me anymore. And I left. Back at the studio, the deadline for our exhibition loomed. I poured everything into my final piece, a mixed media installation built around translucent panels layered with photographic prints, architectural sketches, and pieces of handwritten letters. At the center, suspended like a spine, hung a replica of my wedding veil. The title? Asterisk Erasure. Opening night drew hundreds. As I stood in the corner, watching people move through my work like ghosts passing through memory, I felt a soft tap on my shoulder. It was Callista. In flats. No makeup. A plain coat. She didn't say anything, just nodded, eyes full of something I didn't recognize. Maybe regret, maybe love. She walked the exhibit alone, paused at each panel, took her time. When she left, she didn't say goodbye. And that was okay. Because this was my story, not hers. And I was just getting started. The morning after the exhibition, I sat at the edge of my bed with the invitation still open on my phone. The Edinburgh Design Symposium formally invites Elira Ashton to deliver the opening keynote, Rebuilding Through Ruins. I stared at the words for a long while, running my thumb across the screen as if doing so might erase the anxiety pooling in my chest. Jonah was still asleep beside me, curled in the sheets with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't have to face the entire British design world in 3 weeks. The email had come at midnight, sent by Dr. Maren Adams herself, the same woman who chaired the International Design Futures Committee and had once mentored Callista for 6 months. The message was short but clear. You've earned this. And I knew deep down that the moment I stood on that stage would be the moment everything either crystallized or fractured. The next 3 weeks passed in a kind of productive haze. I moved between my Bristol studio and the Westbridge campus with single-minded focus. My speech, while technically about rebuilding urban spaces post-conflict or disaster, was threaded through with something more personal, an allegory of creative destruction, of burning down old narratives and forging new ones. But Callista haunted every sentence. Not in name, I didn't intend to drag her in front of that crowd, but her fingerprints were all over the metaphors. Architectural theft, emotional gentrification, the politics of artistic space. I couldn't decide if I was speaking to the world or to her. Jonah offered to come with me to Edinburgh. He booked the hotel, mapped the cafes he thought I'd like, packed my notes in a folder so neat it could have passed for a museum exhibit. And when I stepped into the conference hall, an echoing vaulted space nestled between Gothic arches and high-tech screens, my knees almost gave out. "You've got this," he whispered. The keynote was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp. At 8:55, I stood behind the curtain, mic clipped to my collar, clutching a slim notepad, and then I heard them announce my name. I stepped out. The applause was polite, the light warm. A sea of faces stared back, some curious, others skeptical. I opened with the story of a bridge, one built during the post-war boom. It had connected two sides of a fractured city, until it didn't. The materials failed, the vision failed, and no one wanted to admit it, so instead of repairing it, they disguised it, painted it, fenced it off, made it a photo op relic. Then, I pivoted. We all inherit bridges. Some are structural, some are emotional, but what happens when the ones who built them lie about what they made? When they copyright your path, watermark your voice? There was a shift in the room. We rebuild, not by repainting, not by pretending, but by tearing it down and starting honest. Brick by brick. When I finished, the room stood. Not all of it, but enough. Afterward, I fielded questions from students, urban theorists, nonprofit directors. I spoke on 2 panels. And I didn't once check Callista's Instagram. Until I got back to the hotel. There, in her stories, was a photo of the Edinburgh skyline with the caption, "So proud of my little sister. Watching you rebuild is beautiful." I stared at it for a long time. No tag, no mention, but unmistakably a jab. And it kept happening. "Every milestone I reached," she echoed. My Westbridge project went up for auction to fund city parks. She launched a pop-up called Tree to Restore. I gave a guest lecture at UCL. She posted a throwback to her mentorship days with the caption, "Some of us teach in quiet ways. That's okay too." Jonah noticed it before I did. "She's not just reacting, she's mirroring you." "Why would she do that?" He paused. "Because you've become the story now, and she doesn't know who she is without being the main character." It wasn't spiteful, just observant. I thought about confronting her, again, but I was tired of letting her live rent-free in my brain. So I did something else. I started documenting the whole journey, not for revenge, not for the internet, but for me. I created a digital diary, each entry layered with images, voice notes, maps. A kind of multimedia journal of how I rebuilt my life from the ash of hers. I titled it Time's Erosion and Rebirth. I didn't plan to publish it until someone hacked my private server and leaked it. I woke to 3 texts and a flood of Twitter notifications. My name was trending. #erosion and rebirth. At first I panicked. But then something unexpected happened. People weren't mocking it. They were moved. Comments poured in. "This is what healing looks like. Every artist should see this." My sister took credit for my thesis. I never got to say this, thank you. I sat on the floor, back against the fridge, and just sobbed. Because for the first time, the story wasn't about Callista. It was about me. A week later, Penguin UK reached out. They wanted to publish Time's Erosion and Rebirth as an interactive memoir, multimedia ebook, art exhibit tie-in, a full rollout. I forwarded the proposal to Jonah. He called me instantly. "You're doing it, right? What if she sues again?" "Then she sues. And you keep building." I signed the deal. And 2 days after the announcement, Callista called me. Actually called. I almost didn't pick up. But curiosity got the better of me. "Hello?" Silence. Then, I read it. All of it. I waited. "You made me look like a monster." "I didn't make you anything. I told the truth." "You think that's justice?" "No," I said quietly. "I think it's release." A long pause. Then she whispered, "Do you think I ever had talent? Or was it always just branding?" And for a second, I saw her. Really saw her. Not the manipulator, not the rival, but the scared girl trying to prove she was enough. "You had talent," I said honestly, "but you weaponized it." Another pause. Then she hung up. That night, Jonah and I took a walk through the city. Spring had arrived early. The trees were blooming. The cafes were open late. You know what I think? He said, squeezing my hand. What? You're finally free. I looked up at the sky. The stars were faint, but there. Maybe? But something told me the story wasn't done yet. Not quite. The Penguin UK deal didn't just change my career. It changed my entire rhythm. Meetings with editors, concept mock-ups for the multimedia experience, legal reviews, invitations to podcasts, exhibitions, panels, all of it flooding my inbox like a tide I was both surfing and bracing against. At first, I tried to keep up with everything alone. Just me, Jonah helping where he could, but it became impossible. So I hired an assistant. Her name was Priya, sharp, calm, and so organized I joked she was part algorithm. Within days, she sorted my folders, chased up interviews, scheduled meetings, and shielded me from the chaos I didn't need to see. For the first time in months, I could focus. And with the extra space, I began planning the Time Erosion and Rebirth Gallery Showcase. The exhibit would launch alongside the digital memoir. A limited-run installation. I wanted it to feel like walking through a soul cracking open. I'd been offered a space in London, a warehouse-turned-gallery in Shoreditch. Stark walls, soft light, and enough room for what I had in mind. A labyrinth of story. Mixed media, hanging panels, audio moments triggered by motion sensors, journals sealed in glass, and one final piece in the center, a photo projection of the only surviving image from my wedding. A candid. One my cousin took on her phone. It was me, backlit by evening sun, veil caught mid-air, Jonah in the frame laughing. Imperfect, blurry, but it was mine. And I wanted people to stand there, at the center of it all, and know what survival looked like when it was soft. Not victorious, not loud, just honest. The week before the launch, I received an email with no subject line. It had one line of text, "Are you ready for the next war?" No signature. But I knew who sent it. I didn't respond. Instead, I looped in Penguin's legal team and changed all my passwords. 3 days later, it began. A series of anonymous Medium articles surfaced under a pseudonym, clearly Callista's. They accused me of fabrication, claimed Erosion and Rebirth was plagiarized, included half-screenshotted emails, manipulated timestamps, blurry photos meant to discredit me. The articles didn't get much traction at first, but Callista knew how to feed them. She tagged anonymous gossip accounts, sent them tips. Suddenly, influencers who'd praised my story were posting "just asking questions" tweets. Forums lit up. Reddit threads with titles like, "Is Alyra Ashton a fraud?" trended. And then, the leak. An email I'd written 2 years ago, mid-breakdown, venting to a friend about how lost I felt, how I didn't know who I was beyond Callista's shadow, how I sometimes wondered if I'd built anything real or just burned what she'd built. Out of context, it looked damning. One quote headlined every attack. "Sometimes I feel like I'm the fraud." It spread fast. Sponsors for the gallery show pulled out. The press began calling Penguin for statements. And for the first time since this all began, I broke. I lay on the floor of our flat, curtains drawn, unable to speak. Jonah sat beside me, silent. When I finally could breathe, I whispered, "What if she's right? What if I'm no better?" He didn't argue, just pulled out my notebook, the one I'd filled over the last year, my sketches, my scribbled thoughts, the raw beginnings of everything I'd built. "Frauds don't create this," he said. Priya called later that night. "They want a press statement." "No," I said. "No more statements, no more reacting." "Then what do we do?" I stood, legs shaking, walked to the window. We opened the doors. The next morning, I posted a video. Me, no makeup, hoodie, sitting on the floor. I've been accused of being a fraud, of fabricating my story. So here it is. All of it. The good, the ugly, the quiet in between. Not polished, not branded, just truth. I panned the camera across my studio, showed my process, the timelines, the archive folders. I read my own painful emails aloud, owned the line. Sometimes I feel like I'm the fraud. Explained where it came from. Feeling like a fraud doesn't make you one. It makes you human, especially when someone spends years convincing you your voice doesn't matter. It went viral. Again. But this time, the tide didn't just turn, it surged. People defended me, loudly. Artists I'd never met stitched the video. Poets quoted it. Even major news outlets picked it up. Asterisk. What happens when women reclaim their stories? Asterisk ran the headline. Sponsors reappeared. Penguin doubled down. And the gallery show? It opened to a line around the block. I walked through it that first night, silent, watching people stop at panels and cry. Watching strangers connect my pain to theirs. At the center, under the wedding photo, someone had left a handwritten note. Asterisk, you gave me the courage to speak. I didn't cry then, but I did later, in the bathroom, full, ugly sobs. Because this wasn't about Callista anymore. This was bigger. She didn't call, but I knew she was watching. Weeks passed. My book pre-orders soared. The gallery extended its run. I went on a national tour, interviews, podcasts, conferences. Every city I met women like me, stories like mine. But one stop haunted me. Paris. The site of her almost proposal. The place where it all truly cracked. I stood on Pont Alexandre III, the violinist playing nearby, lanterns hanging overhead. It was dusk. I closed my eyes. And I forgave her. Not because she deserved it, but because I did. The war was over. And I'd won. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. When the war ended, I didn't throw a party. I didn't celebrate. I just stopped waiting for the next ambush. It was subtle at first. No dramatic monologue, no swelling orchestral music. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that settles after a thunderstorm, when the air feels thin and heavy, and you realize you're still standing. Jonah noticed it before I did. I'd slept through the night for 6 days straight. I didn't refresh my inbox every 30 minutes. I didn't check if Callista had posted anything about me. Not even once. You're breathing again, he said one morning over coffee, like you're not expecting the house to collapse. I smiled. I think it's because I'm done waiting for her to say sorry. That was a turning point. Because somewhere along the way, I had stopped needing closure and started writing my own endings. The next ending came faster than expected. Penguin's marketing team called me just after Easter with a proposal. The Erosion and Rebirth book would be released in the UK, yes, but also in the US and EU simultaneously. Translations had begun. A companion podcast series was in pre-production. The Shoreditch Gallery exhibit had been optioned for a traveling installation across Europe. They wanted a capstone event to launch the full tour, one final presentation in London, and they wanted me to headline it. It needs to be personal, my editor said, not just another keynote. You've started a movement, people want to see where it began. I thought about that for days. Where had it begun? Not with the deleted wedding photos, not even with the leaked proposal plans. The real beginning was the moment I realized I had a voice, one separate from Callista, loud enough to carry on its own. So I wrote a speech, not just about sisterhood, or art, or ownership, but about silence, about the women who never got to speak, about what happens when your story is stolen before you even get a chance to live it. It took me 3 weeks and 27 drafts. The night before the event, Jonah found me pacing in our flat, muttering lines under my breath. You've got this, he said, pulling me close. You've said everything else with so much fire. Don't hold back now. I didn't sleep much, but I didn't need to. The fire was there. The venue was a converted chapel, now used for talks and performances. High ceilings, stained glass, over 400 people in the audience. And as I waited backstage, I got a text. From Callista. It was a photo of us as kids. She was braiding my hair. We were sitting on our grandmother's porch, the kind of summer light that only exists in memory wrapping around us. Below it, she wrote, I wasn't always the villain. I know that. I hope one day you'll remember me the way I remember you. It didn't undo everything. But it landed, heavy, real. My name was called. I stepped out. And for the first time, I didn't speak with trembling hands. I spoke with clarity, with grace. I told the audience about inheritance, not the monetary kind, but the emotional debts passed down in families. I spoke about art as resistance, about choosing to rebuild after someone rips the scaffolding out from under you. I ended with a line I hadn't written down. I am not the ashes. I am what survived them. The standing ovation felt less like praise and more like release. Afterward, I signed books, took photos, spoke to young women with nervous smiles who whispered that they too had been erased, that they too were starting again. Later that night, Jonah and I walked through the empty chapel, just us and the cleaning crew. He reached for my hand. You realize you're the architect now, right? I looked at him. What do you mean? You're not just the subject anymore. You're the designer of the whole story. It was true. I felt it in my bones. The tour launched the following week. We started in Berlin, then Paris, then Amsterdam. Each gallery exhibit was slightly different. Local artists contributed interpretations. I gave talks, workshops, read excerpts from the book in bookstores that smelled like old paper and ambition. At each stop, I left behind a copy of that childhood photo Callista had sent me. Framed, unlabeled, tucked into the installations. Not as forgiveness, but as a reminder. We all begin soft. We all deserve to be seen. Back in the UK, summer arrived in waves of heat and birdsong. Jonah and I moved into a new flat. Still in Bristol, but brighter, bigger, with space for a garden. And then, one morning in July, I found something on the doorstep. A package. No name, no return address. Inside, a photo album. My wedding photos. All of them. Every last one. Restored, printed, bound in linen. There was a note tucked in the back pocket. So I found a backup I never knew I had. I didn't know if you'd want them, but here they are. I hope they still feel like yours. No signature, but I knew. I flipped through the pages slowly, my heart climbed into my throat. And I cried. Because they did. They still felt like mine. Jonah came home that evening and found me sitting cross-legged in the garden, the album open across my lap. He didn't say anything, just sat beside me. We watched the sun dip below the rooftops, the sky stained in orange and violet. I think she meant it, I whispered. This time. Jonah nodded. Some stories don't need endings, just pauses. And in that moment, I believed him. Maybe this wasn't the final part of the story, but it was peace. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them! Subscribe and turn on notifications. The day after the wedding album arrived, I couldn't stop touching it. Not flipping through it, not obsessing over every frame, just touching it. The linen cover, the ridged binding, the faint embossed title, Elira and Jonah. It was almost cruel, how something so simple could bring so much peace. Jonah caught me asleep with it on my chest that night, the album nestled like a book I'd read cover to cover and couldn't bear to return to the shelf. He didn't say anything, just gently pulled it away and placed it on the nightstand. He knew what it meant. That gesture was more than a gift. It was an apology. It was her. It didn't make everything right, but it made something possible. And in the strange quiet that followed, no leaks, no posts, no jabs or essays or interviews, I realized something else. I didn't know who I was without the fight. That scared me more than I expected. Calma Sea Erosion and Rebirth continued to flourish. The European gallery tour had closed in Prague, with over 40,000 attendees in total. The digital memoir surpassed 500,000 downloads. And the podcast adaptation? Picked up by Audible Originals. My inbox swelled with offers. A fellowship at NYU. A visiting lecture tour across Canada. Even an inquiry from a film agent in Los Angeles. And then, out of nowhere, an invitation to speak at a tech and design summit in Barcelona. That might have felt like just another stop, except the summit's organizing committee. It included a name I hadn't seen in months. Callista Hartley. She hadn't used our family name since she started her brand. It made her sound more curated, I suppose, more magazine-ready. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, that she'd somehow been added after my booking, but then I got the itinerary. My talk, 3 p.m. Her talk, 4 p.m. Back to back, on the same stage. And just like that, the ache in my chest returned, the one I thought I'd exhaled back in Paris. Jonah watched me pace our kitchen for 20 minutes before he finally said, "You could pull out." I could. You won't. He was right. Because part of me wanted to see her. Not to fight, not to gloat, just to look her in the eyes and finally know for sure if she'd changed. The summit was hosted in an old opera house turned tech venue. Rich velvet curtains alongside LED banners, giant screens looping startup reels, designers and programmers and venture capitalists sipping espresso and trying to out-network each other between panels. I arrived early, mostly to calm my nerves. Priya was already there, badge in hand, whispering into a mic headset like she was running a covert op. Green room's on the 3rd floor. Yours is 3A. Hers is 3B. They're adjacent. Of course they were. I spent the next hour rewriting my intro. Not because I didn't know what I wanted to say, but because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. It wasn't fear. It was something deeper. Older. Like my body remembered what my brain wanted to forget. At 2:50, the stage manager gave me the nod. I stepped out. My talk was titled Nibe Designing for the Invisible, How Story Shapes Space. I walked the audience through the arc of my work, the transition from reactive art to intentional architecture, from grief to structure. It was one of the cleanest talks I'd ever given. And as I finished, I saw her. Backstage. Clapping. Callista. Her hair was shorter now, dyed honey blonde. She wore a simple black turtleneck and wide-leg trousers. No camera, no entourage. Just her. I stepped off stage and braced myself. But all she said was, "You were brilliant." And then she walked past me. Her own talk? Times a mirror, not a megaphone, rethinking the role of personal brand. I sat at the back of the auditorium, heart thundering. She didn't reference me, not once, but her message was unmistakable. We spend years trying to look polished when sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is show people the mess. Not because they want drama, but because they want truth. At one point, her voice caught. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel fury or pride or caution. I felt empathy. That night, the summit hosted a mixer on the rooftop garden of a nearby hotel. Wine, jazz, lanterns. I sipped club soda and tried to avoid eye contact with anyone who looked like they might hand me a business card. Then Callista appeared. "Walk with me?" she asked. We wandered down to the lower level, where it was quieter, less curated. "I didn't know if you'd say yes to this summit," she said. I almost didn't. I wouldn't have blamed you. We stood near the edge of a long, reflecting pool. The lights shimmered. "I sent the album," she said after a long silence, "not because I wanted to be forgiven. I just needed you to have it, before anything else changed." "I know." She glanced at me. "I miss us. I miss who we were." "Is that different?" "It is now." She nodded. "I don't think we'll ever go back to what we had." "No. But maybe something new." It wasn't a reconciliation. It wasn't a reset. It was a beginning. Back in Bristol, life returned to its rhythm. Quiet mornings, garden dinners. Jonah reading news out loud while I sketched new exhibits. And then, one afternoon, a letter arrived. Handwritten. Thick cream envelope. No return address. Inside was a contract. Joint exhibition. Asterisk inheritance. A story in 2 voices. Curated by Callista Hartley and Elira Ashton. She wasn't asking to rewrite my story. She was offering to tell hers. Together. I stared at the paper, fingers trembling. Jonah looked over my shoulder. "Well?" I smiled. "I think I'm ready." The contract sat on my desk for 4 days before I signed it. Not because I had doubts, but because I wanted to feel everything before I moved forward. I wanted to sit with the magnitude of what Callista had proposed. Inheritance, a story in two voices. Not as a PR stunt, not as damage control, but as an act of real, intentional creation. I reviewed the details line by line. Callista had included a clause that allowed either of us to pull out at any time without legal penalty. That mattered. It meant she wasn't chaining me to this, she was inviting me. The exhibition would launch in 6 months at the New Victoria Gallery in London, a prestigious but progressive space that had already hosted retrospectives on everything from feminist architecture to digital trauma art. We were given the central hall, 6,000 square feet of narrative real estate. I signed it, mailed it. And then I sat back and stared at the window for almost an hour. When the curator called 2 days later, I was ready. "We don't want a tidy exhibit," she said, her tone rich with the ease of someone who curated stories for a living. "We want duality, conflict, wounds, not just the scars." I said yes to everything. Callista and I agreed to work separately at first. She'd take the West Wing, I'd take the East. We wouldn't share drafts or installations until 2 months before the opening. No influence, no shaping each other's voice. That was her idea, and I respected it. I spent weeks revisiting old materials, re-listening to audio from the early podcast drafts, reading comments on the Times Erosion and Rebirth tour. I made a list of memories I hadn't yet processed, hadn't dared to touch. Moments that lived in the margins. Like the time she burned a collage I made in university because it used one of her photos, or the time I found her name listed as the solo artist in a group exhibition I had coordinated. But also, the time she bailed me out of an expired visa issue in Italy without asking questions. The night she stayed up, feeding me toast and ginger tea after a terrible stomach flu. The message she left me on my 25th birthday. "Whatever happens next, I hope you remember how much I loved you before we knew how to hurt each other." It wasn't black and white. It never had been. I began designing my wing around a single word, threshold. A place of in-between. Of not quite here, not quite gone. Each installation would represent a moment when I stood on the edge of becoming. One piece was a hallway lined with mirrors that fractured the reflection into delayed fragments. Another was a suspended set of doors that never quite closed, always a crack of light behind them. I even included a quiet room, a sanctuary of soundproof velvet walls where visitors could sit in total silence. Each space included audio fragments, letters I never sent, thoughts I never voiced, my voice layered in overlapping whispers. As the build-out began, Jonah became my compass. "Not too clean," he'd remind me, "let it be raw." And it was. It was raw and honest and terrifying. Then, 2 months before opening, we met. The gallery was quiet that morning. Callista arrived first, dressed in a soft gray jumpsuit, her hair clipped up. No entourage, no makeup. I walked in with a folder of notes and a knot in my stomach. We stood between our wings. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, she said, "You want to walk through mine first?" I nodded. Her side began with a corridor of shadowed portraits. All of them were of me, not posed, not curated, candids she'd taken over 20 years. Each one had a caption below. Asterisk, this was the day she stopped trusting me. Asterisk, I took this and told her it was for her portfolio. I submitted it under my name instead. Asterisk, she was laughing here. I don't remember why. I wish I had. I stopped breathing for a moment. Then came the letters. Fragments of journals. A timeline mapped in colored string that crossed over from her wall to mine. She hadn't just told her story. She'd owned it. "I'm sorry," she whispered behind me, "for all of it." I turned. "You can't erase what happened." "I know, but you can honor it." She nodded. We walked through my side next. When she reached the soundproof room, she stood inside for a long time. When she stepped out, her eyes were rimmed red. "You let them rest in there," she said. "Who?" "The ghosts." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The curator met us in the center hall where our two wings converged. "This is where the final piece will go," she said. "Something joint, something unshared." Callista looked at me. "What if it's a doorway?" I tilted my head. "To where?" She shrugged. "Nowhere. Everywhere." We ended up building it together. A 10-foot arch made of salvaged materials from both our studios. The frame was wood from my grandfather's barn. The paint? Scraps from one of her earliest installations. Across the top, etched into the archway, we carved the same word in both our handwriting. * begin. Opening night arrived. The gallery was packed. Critics, friends, strangers, people who'd followed our story from the start, others who'd only learned of it recently. We didn't speak on stage. We didn't hold a Q&A. We just stood together at the entrance. No branding, no performance. Just us. As guests walked through the exhibit, I watched them. Some cried, some touched the walls, others stood in silence for long minutes before passing through the threshold. At the end, under the archway, there was a single sign. *, this is not the end, this is the beginning. The reviews were extraordinary. The exhibition was extended twice. And for the first time in my life, Callista and I shared something that didn't need anyone else's approval. Not press, not likes, not sponsors, just truth. We still didn't call each other every day. We didn't become best friends. But we built something, together. And sometimes, that's enough. The exhibition became a heartbeat. Not just mine, not just Callista's. It pulsed through the city. Through inboxes and columns and late-night conversations. A woman at a cafe stopped me to say, "I brought my daughter. She's still talking about it." A man emailed to confess he hadn't spoken to his sister in 8 years, and finally called her. One museum in Oslo requested to license the entire dual installation permanently. Callista and I didn't talk much in the weeks after the opening, not out of avoidance but out of space. Gentle, necessary space. We each returned to our own work, our own lives. But the connection remained unspoken, humming like a chord that had finally settled into harmony. I thought that would be the last chapter. I was wrong. It began with a letter, handwritten, no signature. *, you don't know me, but I knew your mother. I read that first line 5 times. Our mother, the woman who left us, who vanished without a trace when Callista was 10 and I was 7. We didn't speak about her. Not really. The silence was a legacy. A shadow we both inherited. The letter continued. *. She worked at the Thistle workshop in Liverpool, back in the 90s. Said she had daughters. Said she was leaving something for them when she left. I never understood. Until I saw your name in the paper, the exhibition, the arch. *. I think she meant this. I think you're the ones meant to finish it. There was an address, an old arts collective on the Merseyside docks. I stared at it for a long time. Then I called Callista. She answered on the second ring. "I got a letter," I said. "So did I," she whispered. Silence stretched. "I think we should go," she said. "Together." We met at Paddington Station the next morning, both in denim and oversized coats, like girls again, like strangers. The train ride to Liverpool was quiet. Neither of us spoke much. We watched the green blur of countryside slip past. When we arrived, we took a cab to the docks. The air smelled like salt and rust. The Thistle workshop was a crumbling brick building with sea glass embedded in the walls. Vines covered half the facade. A metal sign swung crooked above the door. Inside, a woman in her 70s sat at a long wooden table, polishing what looked like a brass gear. She looked up. "You must be the sisters." She introduced herself as Agnes, said she remembered our mother vividly, said her name wasn't Rachel, as we knew, but Ray. She was an artist, not the kind that made shows or sold work, the kind that left things in places, messages, whispers, textures. She led us to a back room. It was small, dusty. The windows were bricked up from the outside. but on the far wall, under a sheet of cloth, was a mural. Agnes pulled the cloth away. I gasped. It was a half-finished collage, layers of found material, old boarding passes, receipts, newspaper clippings, photographs, and in the center, 2 figures, girls, one with her hair in braids, one with a notebook in her hand. We never knew what it was, Agnes said. She called it inheritance. She said her daughters would know how to finish it. Callista stepped forward. Her hand shook as she touched the edge of the wall. That's us, she whispered. We spent the rest of the day photographing everything, cataloging every corner. Agnes, let us take some of the smaller pieces. An envelope labeled for when they're ready, filled with more notes, sketches, color swatches. I felt like I was dreaming. We returned to London with something fragile, not just the materials, but the sense that maybe we'd been part of a story far bigger than our own bitterness. That night, I sat in the garden, staring at the envelope. When Jonah came out, I handed him the letter. He read it, twice. She left you art, he said quietly, not absence. We didn't speak for a while. Then he asked, what are you going to do? I already knew the answer. Callista and I spent the next 3 months in shared studios across London, piecing together what Ray had started. Each new fragment deepened the mystery. One sketch had my birth date scribbled on it. Another included an early draft of a poem Callista once thought she'd written herself. It was eerie, beautiful, painful. We named the project The Mother Thread. The first time we announced it publicly, people assumed it was fiction, an elaborate performance art story. But it wasn't. It was our mother, reaching through time. She hadn't left a will, she hadn't left instructions. She'd left a question. Can you finish this together? And we would. For ourselves. For her. For the versions of us that once waited at the door, thinking she might return. We didn't find closure. We found creation. We didn't plan a reveal. We didn't rent a gallery. We didn't pitch it to the press. The Mother Thread wasn't about performance. It wasn't a story to sell. It was a language we were just beginning to speak. Callista moved into the guest room of our flat for 6 weeks. Jonah quietly rearranged his work schedule, adjusted his routines, and never once complained about the endless piles of prints and crumpled paper that overtook every inch of the living room. He would just make tea, place mugs beside our laptops, and say, if this gets any more profound, I'm moving into a yurt. We laughed, we cried, we fought. But we created. Each piece of Ray's unfinished work gave us another breadcrumb into her mind, into the life she'd lived before she became our mother, before she disappeared. She was chaotic and brilliant, our Ray. There were layers to her process, maps of cities she'd lived in, marked with lines that meant nothing to anyone but her, snippets of song lyrics in the margins. A Polaroid of a cracked sidewalk labeled Portal. She never said why she left. But the art said enough. It said she was split between the urge to build and the compulsion to escape. That every time she stitched something beautiful together, she feared it would bind her in place. And in that way, Callista and I both saw ourselves. We debated how to finish the mural. She wanted to replicate the scale and technique of Ray's original approach, layered textures, immersive scale, a rawness of edge. I wanted to abstract it. To keep the core emotional intent, but translate it through modern materials, transparent resin, fiber optic thread, coded audio triggers. We argued for 3 days. Finally, over wine and late-night toast, we admitted the truth. Both versions were right. Both versions were hers. So we decided to create 2. One would live in Liverpool, in the same Thistle workshop where it had begun. The other, a touring installation. We called them Thread East and Thread West. 2 interpretations. 2 daughters. Both true. The night we completed the final resin mold for Time's Thread West, Callista came into my room holding a folder. I wasn't going to show you this, she said, but I think you need to see it. Inside were letters, dozens, all addressed to Ray, none sent. I used to write them, when you were asleep, when I was angry, when I missed her. I read them slowly. They were beautiful, messy, brutal. In one, she begged Ray to explain. In another, she blamed her for my shyness, my panic attacks, my years of silence. In yet another, she simply wrote, "I became you without meaning to." When I looked up, Callista was crying. "I hated her," she said, "and I worshipped her. And sometimes I don't know which voice is mine and which is just an echo of hers." I took her hand. "You're not alone in that." In the weeks that followed, we incorporated the letters into the exhibit. Not directly, not on display, but inside an audio chamber, a private space where visitors could hear whispers layered in distortion. No context, no clarity, just emotion. We called it the Frequency Room. The press found us eventually. A cultural editor from The Guardian wrote an exposé on *Thread East. This is the art of what's unfinished, told by the Daughters of Absence, a revelation in raw narrative. Suddenly, museums called, film directors, book agents. We didn't answer right away. Instead, we flew to Liverpool. Agnes, the woman who ran the Thistle, had passed away. She'd left us the key. We spent 3 days repainting the interior, hanging Ray's early work along the walls. Callista brought a bench she'd built. I installed light sensors in the floorboards. On the final day, we invited no one, just us. We lit a candle beneath Ray's mural, placed her photo next to it, and we stood in silence. Jonah arrived that evening. He'd taken the train after finishing a week of late meetings. When he walked into the workshop, he looked around, took it all in, and said, "She'd be proud of you. Both of you." We didn't respond. But we didn't need to. The next month, we opened applications for an artist-in-residence program at Thistle. We called it the Inheritance Fellowship. 1 artist, 3 months, 1 question. What do you wish you could finish? Hundreds applied. We read every application on the floor of my kitchen. Selected a sculptor from Warsaw, a woman who made monuments out of recycled grief. The day she arrived, she cried when she saw the workshop. "This place feels haunted," she said, "but in a kind way." We laughed, then cried, then laughed again. That winter, Callista and I returned home for Christmas. Our father, still cautious, still quiet, greeted us at the door with mismatched socks and an awkward hug. He didn't mention Ray. But after dinner, he pulled me aside. "She wasn't always like that," he said. "She tried, and when she couldn't stay, she left the only way she knew how." I nodded. "I know." He looked surprised. "You forgive her?" I thought for a long time. "I'm learning to." That night, Callista and I sat by the fireplace. She reached into her coat pocket, handed me a small box. Inside, a ring, brass, handmade. The inside was etched with the words, "Carb, we begin again." "It's not an apology," she said. "It doesn't have to be." I slipped it on. We didn't take a photo. We didn't tag each other. We just sat. Warm. Whole. The ring never left my finger. Not when I presented at the Dublin Art Symposium. Not when we walked through the first American installation of Thread West in Chicago. Not even when I laid awake some nights, staring at the ceiling, wondering if healing was just a prettier word for forgetting. It stayed. A brass circle, etched with 4 words that had reshaped the entire narrative. We begin again. By the time spring rolled around, the fellowship at Thistle had turned into something larger than we ever imagined. We received submissions from every continent. Multilingual essays, sculptures made of sand and ash, poems tattooed into tree bark. We hired a small curatorial team, built a digital archive, partnered with a social justice initiative that taught art therapy in low-income schools. Callista took the lead on visual storytelling. I managed the infrastructure, the funding, the long-term planning. It was the most seamless we'd ever been. Until the documentary request came. It was from Archer Rowe. If you're not in the film world, that name might not mean anything. But Archer was a legend, the kind of documentarian who never worked from press releases or storyboards. He embedded He listened. He made films that left audiences gutted, reverent, seen. He wanted to make a feature-length film about Asterisk, the mother thread. About Ray. About us. Callista said yes immediately. I said no. We argued for the first time in 6 months. It's time, she said, pacing the studio. People already think they know the story. This is our chance to tell it truthfully. I don't want to be dissected again, I said. Not for someone else's edit bay. Archer doesn't exploit, he reveals. Same thing, just with better lighting. We didn't speak for 3 days. Jonah, always neutral in moments like these, just waited, gave me space, made me pasta. Eventually, I relented. But I gave conditions. No filming inside our home. Final approval of all audio overlays. One segment from Ray's original journals stays completely private. Archer agreed. He arrived in April, tall, quiet, with a face made for radio. He carried a single camera and a notebook. No crew, no boom mic, no aggressive questions. Just presence. He followed us for 10 weeks, from Bristol to Liverpool, from gallery halls to kitchen tables. He interviewed Jonah, Priya, our father, even Agnes's niece, who'd taken over part-time caretaking at Thistle. We were transparent, open, vulnerable. And still, I hated every second of it. Not because of Archer, but because the camera was a mirror I hadn't asked for. It caught everything. The way I flinched when Callista raised her voice. The silence that crept in when Ray's name came up. The tension I didn't realize I still carried. And then, one morning, Archer asked a single question that undid me. What do you think you inherited that you still haven't forgiven yourself for? I walked out of the room. Jonah found me 20 minutes later, sitting on the back steps, knees tucked to my chest. What if I was always meant to become her? I whispered. Not the artist, the ghost. Jonah sat beside me. You didn't vanish. Not yet. He looked at me. You could have walked away from all of this. You didn't. I didn't respond. But I didn't walk away. 2 weeks later, Archer showed us a rough cut. We watched it in silence. It was beautiful, intimate, unflinching. Ray's voice, taken from old cassette tapes found behind a false wall at Thistle, played over the footage. Her voice, for the first time in decades, filled the room. I was never good at staying, but I was always good at beginning. Callista cried. Jonah held my hand. I sat completely still. It premiered at Sheffield Dockfest. Then Sundance. Then Berlin. It won 2 awards. Suddenly, The Mother Thread wasn't just an art project. It was a global story, a movement. We were interviewed for NPR, Cham the New Yorker, Cham Time. An audio platform commissioned an immersive, walkthrough version of the installation, narrated in Ray's voice. And then, Netflix called. Not for the documentary, for the adaptation. They wanted to make it into a scripted, limited series. At first, I laughed. Then I cried. Then I said yes. We insisted on being part of the writer's room. We co-executive produced. We auditioned actresses to play ourselves. That was surreal. The woman cast as me was smaller, lighter, quieter. I hated it. Until I saw her perform the scene where the wedding photos were deleted. She broke down with a kind of trembling control that made my whole chest ache. And I realized it wasn't about accuracy. It was about honoring the truth beneath the facts. The series was greenlit in October. They called it Times Fracture 6 episodes, each named after one of Ray's unfinished journal entries. Callista and I watched the first 3 episodes in her flat, legs tangled under a shared blanket. At the end of episode 2, where Elira walks out of a boardroom after finally confronting Callista, we sat in silence. Then she said, "That's not how it really happened." "No," I said, "but it's how it felt." We toasted with cheap Prosecco. Laughed so hard we cried. And somewhere, I think Ray was laughing too. The night before the series premiered, I barely slept. It wasn't fear. Or even excitement. It was the quiet realization that the story, the one that had once been mine and mine alone, secret and sacred and raw, was about to become public domain. Fictionalized. Binge-watched. Rated. Jonah made tea around 3 a.m., knowing I'd never ask. "It's just a show," he said gently, handing me the mug. "No," I replied. "It's the story of the worst and best years of my life." He nodded. "Then let them see it. All of it." Jonah McSinjwad, premiered on a Sunday. The opening credits played over shots of textured walls, layered art, fragmented photographs. Our mother's voice narrated the prologue. "I was always leaving, even when I stayed." And just like that, the world leaned in. By midnight, Twitter was flooded. TikTok clips circulated with tears, side-by-side reactions, discussions on art and grief and sisterhood. Headlines the next morning called it a masterpiece. The Atlantic ran a piece titled, "The Series That Finally Understands Female Forgiveness." But the most surreal part? The fan art. There were paintings, animations, music remixes of Ray's voice. One girl in Brazil recreated the threshold hallway in her school's basement. Another in Kyoto choreographed a dance called Inheritance. I wasn't sure how to feel. The show was beautiful, powerful, but it was also no longer mine. The characters had become versions of us, yes, but filtered through script notes and cinematographers and costume departments. When I watched the actress who played me fall apart in her studio after the fake wedding photo deletion, I cried. But when she confronted her father in the final scene of episode 5, saying, "You didn't protect me from her, and now I can't stop becoming her," I turned off the screen. Because that wasn't something I'd ever said, but it was something I'd thought. Callista handled the attention better than I did. She always had. Interviews, panels, a sudden swarm of podcast requests. I retreated. Back to my garden, my quiet, my work. One afternoon, while pruning the lavender, I found a letter stuck in the hedgerow. It had no stamp, just my name in graphite. Inside, *, "You said we begin again. But I don't know how to keep beginning. Tell me what comes next. See." I sat on the porch for hours with that letter in my lap. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I finally did. I texted her the next morning. "Meet me in Florence." 2 words, 1 location. The place where Ray had disappeared for 2 years, where her trail ended. Callista didn't ask questions. She just replied, "Tell me when." We flew out in March. The Tuscan air still held the bite of winter. We stayed in a tiny pension on the edge of the historic quarter, shared a room, like we were 20 again, like we were trying to make peace with all the versions of us we'd left behind. I brought Ray's last known journal. Callista brought 3 rolls of unprocessed film she found in a box marked unsorted. We walked the city, followed her notes. *. Today I watched a woman cry into her gelato on Ponte Vecchio. Beautiful. *. Found a door painted blue with no handle. Must return. *. In dreams I am made of broken marble. We found that door. It was faded now, weathered by rain, still no handle. I placed my palm against it. Callista said, "Maybe it's not a door. Maybe it's a marker." That night, we stayed up until dawn, laying side by side on a rooftop terrace, watching the stars. "We could live here," Callista whispered, "for a while. Finish something, start something else." And I realized she wasn't running. She was building. We stayed for 3 months. Opened a micro-residency. 4 artists. 1 villa, no rules. We called it Times the Blue Door Collective. We didn't advertise. Just sent invitations to people we'd watched from afar. Poets in hiding, sculptors working in shadows, dancers who only performed in their kitchens. One woman from Lisbon arrived with a suitcase full of mirrors and nothing else. A photographer from Oslo brought a series of undeveloped images taken during a coma recovery. A man from Cairo built a sound sculpture from his father's voicemail messages. Each story stitched something new into us. The villa became a sanctuary. A chapel of making. Sometimes Callista and I worked together. Sometimes we didn't speak for days. But it was okay. It was healthy. One morning, I walked past her room and found her curled up with a sketch pad. On the page, a new archway. Inside it, 2 figures. Not us. 2 children. Below it, what do we leave behind? I didn't ask what it meant. I didn't need to. That summer, Jonah visited. We walked the cliffs just outside the city. He took my hand and said, "You look like yourself again." I smiled. "I feel like someone new." He laughed. "Same thing." I wasn't healed, not completely. I still flinched sometimes. Still wondered what else Ray hadn't told us. Still checked the shadows twice when I felt too happy. But I was no longer afraid of the quiet. Because in it, I heard possibility. Florence made us soft again. Not weak, not passive, just unguarded in a way we hadn't been since childhood. There was something about the pace of the city, the slowness of its mornings, the hush of its evenings, that felt like it had been built for grief and recreation. The cathedral bells marked time in a language that didn't need translation, and every day we were reminded that beauty could live in cracks. By the end of June, the first cohort of the Blue Door Collective had completed their residencies. We hosted a closing exhibition in the courtyard of the villa. Nothing formal, no press, just candles, wine, and a series of installations built from memory and moss and music. One artist turned the unused garden shed into an audio chamber that played whispered names of every lost person they'd ever known. Another projected silent videos across stone walls, footage of kitchen tables and half-finished toasts. People wept, and smiled, and wept again. It wasn't just art. It was testimony. After the guests left, Callista and I sat under the wisteria vines until morning. We didn't speak. There was no need. A week later, Jonah flew back to the UK for work. The collective dispersed, and for the first time in weeks, the villa was quiet. That's when I started dreaming of Ray again. Not abstract dreams. Specific ones. She was always in the same room, a small, high-ceiling studio with one window and walls covered in charcoal sketches. She never spoke, just looked up from her work and stared at me. Not cruelly, just waiting. Callista said she had similar dreams. "I think she wants something from us," she said one morning, pouring espresso into chipped cups. "Not more art, not more narrative, something else." "What?" Callista shrugged. "Maybe just for us to stop making her the Axis." The idea landed like a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. We'd built our entire reconciliation around Ray. Our entire career pivot. Our emotional renaissance. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to step off that orbit. So we did. The second cohort of the collective arrived late July. This time, we didn't hover, we observed, facilitated, let the villa become theirs, not ours. And we began a new project. Not as a memorial. Not as a statement. Just as an experiment. We called it The Sister House. An immersive installation exploring layered memory. Part architectural maze. Part narrative performance. The concept was to recreate a physical version of all the places we'd ever shared or survived. Bedrooms, hallways, hospital waiting rooms, dance studios, gallery backrooms. Each space would hold a different decade of our lives. Visitors would move through the house not in chronological order, but emotional order, based on how they answered a question at the door. What did you almost forget? Callista designed the audio threading. I built the spatial design. We worked like we were possessed. Sometimes I forgot to eat, she forgot to sleep. But we were alive. One afternoon, while laying out the blueprints, I paused. "This could go on forever, you know," I said. "What?" "This story, this making, this sharing." Callista looked up from her screen. "You say that like it's a bad thing." "I'm tired of telling people who we are." She was quiet for a long time. Then, "So let's tell them who we're becoming." That became our new compass. The sister house opened in Lisbon in November. It ran for 6 weeks, sold out. Critics called it disorienting, haunting, revolutionary. But the reviews that mattered most were handwritten notes slipped into our mailbox. Asterisk, I walked into the bedroom I grew up in, even though I never met you. Asterisk, I haven't spoken to my sister in 10 years. I called her from the hallway installation. Asterisk, I didn't know I needed to forgive myself until the final room. We cried more than we expected, but not from grief, from awe. The final room in the sister house held no walls, no furniture, just a single bench and a mirror. Visitors sat, looked at themselves, heard a faint layered whisper of every previous room's ambient sound. Nothing more. It became the most talked about part. People asked what it meant. We never told them, because it wasn't our place. That was the shift, I think. That moment. The realization that we weren't the story anymore. We were the space where others could find theirs. It changed everything. We handed over direction of the third Blue Door cohort to 2 alumni. We stepped back from the Mother Thread programming. We returned home. To quiet. To Bristol. And one morning, as I watered the garden, Callista appeared beside me. "Do you regret any of it?" she asked. "Not a second." She smiled. "Even the worst parts?" "Especially the worst parts." She paused. "You know what's next, right?" I did. It wasn't a gallery. It wasn't a book. It wasn't a show. It was rest. Not retreat, not erasure. Rest. The choice to be still. To build without announcing. To remember without projecting. So we did. We said no to the film festival circuit. No to the anthology deal. No to the legacy exhibition at MoMA. And we spent winter doing nothing public. Just dinners, walks, rereading books we once loved, making soup, sending handwritten letters, sitting in silence. We weren't quitting. We were growing roots. And for the first time in our entire lives, it felt like enough. Rest isn't a pause. It's a revolution. I learned that sometime in the dead of winter, curled under 2 layers of wool with an open book in my lap and no need to be anywhere else, no schedule, no spotlight, no statement. Just stillness. Callista moved into a small flat a few blocks away, close but not too close. We saw each other for tea, walks, grocery trips, no creative agendas, no panels, no pressure. It was the first time since the wedding photo incident, years ago now, that our relationship had no center of conflict or project. Just presence. And it was strange. To be sisters again without the scaffolding. We didn't always know what to say. But silence didn't hurt like it used to. Spring arrived early that year. The garden woke in slow waves, crocus, then daffodils, then the stubborn purple irises that only bloomed after 2 days of uninterrupted rain. I took long walks without my phone, wrote poems I never shared, repaired a broken chair we'd rescued from a charity shop 3 winters ago. Jonah and I found a rhythm that felt like breath. Even in silence, we moved around each other with ease. He called it our, quote, invisible waltz. Quote, "I think we're finally boring," he joked one night, stirring soup while I folded laundry. "Finally," I replied. But peace doesn't mean life stops. It just means you start paying attention differently. In April, I got a message from a woman named Soraya, one of our very first Blue Door artists. She wrote, "Asterisk. I've been offered a commission in Jakarta, but I'm scared. I've never built something from scratch without you or Callista nearby. Is that silly?" I smiled. Typed, "Asterisk. It's not silly, it's sacred. Go." A week later, someone sent me a photo from a Jakarta rooftop. A mural. A single line across it in bold red. Asterisk. We begin again. Our story had legs now. Wings. It no longer needed our permission to travel. Callista came over that afternoon with scones and a sketch pad. She set it in front of me without speaking. On the page was a new structure, a half-built amphitheater, surrounded by unfinished scaffolding, pieces of thread stretched from one end to the other. I looked at her. She shrugged. Just sketching. You miss it? Not exactly, but sometimes I feel the pulse again. I knew what she meant. Not ambition, not pressure, just the pulse of an idea taking form. Let it grow, I said, but don't chase it. That became our new rhythm. Ideas, not deadlines. Vision, not velocity. We began to hold monthly dinners, quiet, invitation-only evenings with local artists, musicians, makers. No theme, just food and candor. One night, a young ceramicist asked, "How do you survive when everything is content?" I didn't have a neat answer, but I said this: make things that don't need applause, then watch who finds them. It resonated. The next morning, the ceramicist dropped off a bowl at my door, carved into the clay. Make it anyway. I kept it by my writing desk. That summer, we received a letter from a woman in Thessaloniki. She ran a small arts nonprofit and had built an exhibition based entirely on Ray's journal fragments she'd discovered through the documentary. She invited us to come. Callista and I didn't hesitate. Greece welcomed us with citrus trees and long shadows. The exhibit was simple: one room, a looped audio track of overlapping journal entries, sculptural interpretations of words, a wall where visitors could write the thing they most feared forgetting. It stunned us, because it was Ray, reinterpreted, without distortion. Someone else had carried her. We stood in the corner that evening, watching strangers leave their truths behind in chalk. Callista leaned in, whispered, "She never had to be loud, just lasting." I nodded. Back in Bristol, we kept living. Quietly. Meaningfully. The sister house was picked up by 3 more international festivals. We gave our blessing. We didn't attend. People kept asking what was next. We said we're still listening, because that's what it had become. Less about output, more about observation. Not influence, resonance. We had nothing to prove anymore. Not to each other, not to the world. We'd survived the fracture. We'd made it through the erasure. We'd told the story. And now, we were living the after. It happened quietly, the way most endings do. Not with a bang, but with a letter. We were deep into October. The trees in Clifton had turned. The sky hung low, and I had just returned from the bakery with a paper bag full of fresh fig scones when I saw the envelope. It sat on the doormat, cream-colored, heavy. My name handwritten in the same script I'd recognize anywhere. Callista's. But it wasn't a note. It wasn't an invitation. It was a goodbye. Not a dramatic one. Not even permanent. But a shift. Asterisk. I'm leaving Bristol for a while. Maybe a year. Maybe more. There's a school in Morocco that needs someone to rebuild its art program. They wrote to me after seeing the mother thread. I want to go. Not to escape. To teach. To listen. To remember who I am outside the noise. My hands trembled. Asterisk. I'm not running. Not this time. And I'm not asking you to follow. I'm just telling you the truth. Because I want us to keep growing. Not clinging. Asterisk. You are the story, and the rewrite, and the shelter. Thank you for never erasing me, even when I didn't deserve the ink. Asterisk. Begin again. Always. C. I sat on the floor of my hallway and read it 3 more times. Then I smiled. And I cried. And I made 2 cups of tea, even though I was alone. Because some habits feel holy. She left a week later. We didn't make it a scene. Just a walk to the train, a tight hug, a whispered promise. I watched the platform empty. Then I turned and walked home. And the silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like possibility. The next year unfolded slowly. I returned to the villa in Florence, not to work, just to be. I planted tomatoes, hosted quiet dinners, wrote letters by hand. And I started something new. A book. Not a memoir, not an essay. A novel. Fictional, imagined, free. It began with two sisters, yes, but they weren't us. They were rougher, funnier, less wise. They made worse choices. And I loved them. It felt like breathing for the first time in years. At night, I recorded small voice memos, not for publishing, just for memory. Asterisk. Today I saw a woman cry beside a vineyard. I don't know her story, but I believe she's still becoming. I sent a few to Callista. She sent back photos of paint-streaked fingers and student murals that made me gasp. We didn't talk often, but we never drifted, because we had finally become the thing we'd always wanted to be. Separate. And still close. A year later, the Blue Door Collective celebrated its 5th cohort. We didn't attend in person, but we sent a box. Inside were tokens from every project we'd ever built. A resin shard from Threadwest, a replica of the sister house's final mirror, a scanned page from Ray's journal, marked only with one word, Carrie, and a brass ring. Etched inside, we begin again. The novel released the following spring. It didn't go viral, it didn't win awards, but it mattered. Because it was mine. And when a woman emailed from Helsinki to say, I saw my sister in your story, I saw myself too, I wept. Because that was enough. It had always been enough. One morning, long after the frost had melted, I found myself back at the gallery where the mother thread first opened. The building was quieter now, but the light still hit the same part of the wall at 10:43 a.m. I stood there, watching dust dance in the sunbeam. And I whispered, thank you. To Ray. To the silence. To the story. To the girl who once lost her wedding photos. And to the woman who chose to begin again anyway. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.